Jamal Washington, CEO of Washington Technologies, watches in stunned silence as 152 flights simultaneously ground to a halt across America, affecting 38,000 passengers. His phone still warm from the call he just made after being denied his first-class seat. Airline stock plummeting on screens behind the gate agent. Before we dive into this incredible story of power, discrimination, and consequences, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Hit that like button and subscribe if you want to see more stories about people standing up against injustice. Now, let's rewind to see how one morning changed an entire industry. The day began like any other for Jamal Washington. The alarm on his smartphone chimed at precisely 5 a.m., and he rose with the discipline that had carried him from the south side of Chicago to the boardrooms of America's elite. Today was particularly important, a meeting in San Francisco that could seal a $500 million government contract for Washington Technologies, the cybersecurity firm he had built from nothing into a $3.2 billion enterprise. Standing in front of his penthouse window overlooking Central Park, Jamal methodically prepared for the day ahead. His morning routine was unchanged despite his success: 60 push-ups, a protein shake, and 15 minutes of meditation. What had changed was everything around him: the Italian marble beneath his feet, the Armani suit carefully selected for today's meeting, and the driver waiting 60 floors below. "You've earned this," Jamal whispered to himself, a daily affirmation to combat the imposter syndrome that occasionally surfaced even after 15 years of success. His phone buzzed with a message from Kimberly Jones, his executive assistant. All documents prepared for the SF meeting. PowerPoint on secure server. Legal team on standby. Weather clear for flight. Car arriving in 20. Jamal texted back, "Thanks, Kim. Operation Government Contract is go." He smiled at their inside joke. Every major deal had a mission name, a tradition they'd started when the company was just the two of them working out of his garage apartment. By 6:30 a.m., he was in the back of a sleek black Escalade, his driver Andre Harris navigating the early morning Manhattan traffic with expert precision. "Big day, Mr. Washington?" Andre asked, catching Jamal's eye in the rearview mirror. "Could be, Andre. If we land this contract, that's 50 new jobs. Good ones too, benefits, stock options, the works. My nephew just graduated with a computer science degree from NYU," Andre mentioned casually. "Send his resume to Kim," Jamal replied without hesitation. "No promises, but we're always looking for fresh talent." This was how Jamal operated, recognizing opportunity and connection in every interaction. It was partly why Washington Technologies had the highest employee retention rate in the industry. As they approached LaGuardia Airport, Jamal reviewed his presentation notes one final time. The contract would position his company as the primary cybersecurity provider for 3 government agencies. Beyond the financial implications, it would cement Washington Technologies as an industry leader. "Have a successful trip, Mr. Washington," Andre said as he unloaded Jamal's carry-on luggage at the terminal. "Thanks, Andre. Remember, that resume." The airport was beginning to fill with the morning rush of business travelers. Jamal moved through the space with the confidence of someone who traveled frequently. His status granted him access to the expedited security line, though he noticed the subtle shift in the TSA agent's demeanor when he approached, the slightly more intense scrutiny of his ID, the additional glance at his boarding pass. Small things. Things he'd grown accustomed to noticing. He'd made a science of remaining unaffected by these microaggressions. Success was his answer to prejudice. Excellence was his shield. At the security checkpoint, he removed his Rolex watch and placed it in the tray alongside his MacBook and iPhone. The TSA agent raised an eyebrow. "Nice watch." Jamal nodded politely but said nothing. The unspoken question, "How could you afford this?" hung in the air between them. After clearing security, Jamal headed toward the airline's premium lounge. His company had a corporate account with National American Airlines, and he typically flew with them for domestic travel. As he presented his membership card to the lounge attendant, he overheard a conversation that made him pause. "Is he really in first?" a female voice whispered. "That's what his boarding pass says," another voice responded. "Seat 2A. Jamal didn't turn to identify the speakers. This wasn't the first time he'd overheard such comments, and it likely wouldn't be the last. Instead, he accepted his lounge access with a smile and found a quiet corner to make some calls before boarding. An hour later, his phone rang with a call from Kimberly. "Just checking in," she said. "Nathan from the Department of Transportation called to confirm your dinner next week. Also, the San Francisco team is ready for your arrival. Hotel confirmed the presidential suite is prepared." "Everything's on track," Jamal replied. "I should board in about 20 minutes." As he ended the call, the lounge attendant announced that first-class boarding for flight NA 721 to San Francisco would begin shortly. Jamal gathered his belongings and headed to Gate B-17, unaware that the next 30 minutes would set in motion events that would rock an entire industry. Walking toward the gate, he felt the familiar weight of expectations and assumptions settling on his shoulders. 15 years as a black CEO had taught him that in certain spaces, he would always be seen as an anomaly, an exception. He had built a billion-dollar company, employed over 500 people, and changed the face of cybersecurity technology, yet he still encountered the raised eyebrows, the double checks, the subtle questioning of his belonging. As he approached Gate B-17, he noticed the gate agent, a blonde woman whose name tag read Heather Miller, glance up at him and then down at her computer screen with a slight frown. It was a small gesture, barely perceptible, but Jamal had developed a sixth sense for these moments. The first-class line was empty as he approached, boarding pass and ID in hand. Behind him, the regular boarding lines were beginning to form. He stepped up to the counter, prepared for what might come next. "Good morning," he said with a practiced smile. "Jamal Washington, seat 2A. "Good morning, sir." Heather Miller's voice carried a politeness that didn't reach her eyes as she took Jamal's boarding pass and ID. She studied his driver's license with unusual intensity, flipping it over, holding it under the counter light, and comparing the photo to his face multiple times. "Is there a problem?" Jamal asked calmly. "Just following protocol," she replied without looking up. "We need to verify all first-class passengers carefully." Jamal glanced behind him where an older white man had just entered the first-class line. The businessman checked his watch impatiently. "I've been a platinum member for 8 years, Jamal said, keeping his tone neutral. "Never had my ID examined quite so thoroughly." Heather didn't respond but instead called over a colleague. "Brian, can you help me verify this boarding pass?" Brian Thompson, a man with thinning brown hair and a perpetual frown, came over and peered at the computer screen. "You're in 2A, first class?" Brian asked, his tone suggesting this was highly unusual. "That's correct," Jamal replied. "Corporate account. Washington Technologies. We book about 300 flights a year with your airline." He maintained eye contact, aware that several passengers were now watching the exchange. Experience had taught him that displaying anger would only reinforce stereotypes. Calm assertion was his only option. "I'm showing a flag on this reservation," Brian said, not acknowledging Jamal's statement about his company's relationship with the airline. "What kind of flag?" Jamal asked. "I'm not authorized to discuss that," Brian replied. "Let me get my supervisor." As Brian walked away, Heather continued to hold Jamal's ID and boarding pass, effectively preventing him from boarding. Through the jetway window, Jamal could see passengers already boarding the plane. The white businessman behind him was growing more impatient. "Excuse me," the businessman interjected. "I'm going to miss my connection if we don't start boarding soon." Heather immediately smiled. "I'm so sorry for the delay, sir. Let me check you in right away." She took his boarding pass and ID, gave them the briefest glance, and processed him in seconds. "Have a wonderful flight, Mr. Peterson." Sorry for the wait. Jamal watched this exchange with a stony expression. The contrast was so blatant it was almost comical. Almost. A moment later, Brian returned with an older man whose name tag identified him as Scott Peterson, gate supervisor. What seems to be the issue here? Scott asked, directing his question to Brian rather than to Jamal. This gentleman is attempting to board in first class, but there's a flag on his reservation, Brian explained. Scott finally turned to Jamal. Sir, it appears the first-class cabin has been overbooked. We're going to need to reassign you to a seat in economy. Jamal looked through the jetway window again, noting that most passengers had boarded. He could clearly see the first-class cabin with several empty seats, including what would be 2A. That's interesting, Jamal said evenly, because I can see empty seats in first class from here. Including my assigned seat, 2A, by the window. Scott's face tightened. Those passengers may not have boarded yet. I've been standing here for 15 minutes, Jamal pointed out. The boarding announcement was made 20 minutes ago. First-class passengers board first. A small crowd of waiting passengers had gathered, some pretending not to watch while others openly recorded the interaction on their phones. Jamal was acutely aware of being on stage. Look, Scott said, lowering his voice, we have discretion over seating assignments for the comfort of all our passengers. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable in economy today. The implication was clear. Jamal didn't fit Scott's image of a first-class passenger. I would be most comfortable in the seat I paid for, Jamal replied, his voice level but firm. The one my company paid for through our corporate account that represents hundreds of thousands in revenue for your airline annually. Scott's expression hardened. Sir, you can either accept the economy seat we're offering or wait for the next available flight to San Francisco in 5 hours. Those are your options. A woman in line spoke up. That's ridiculous. He has a first-class ticket. Scott turned to her sharply. Ma'am, this doesn't concern you. Jamal raised a hand slightly, signaling to the woman that her support, while appreciated, wasn't necessary. He'd fought these battles before. He knew the terrain. May I see your name again? Jamal asked, looking directly at Scott's badge. Scott Peterson, gate supervisor, the man replied with a hint of smugness. And yes, you can file a complaint if you want. Now what will it be? Economy on this flight or wait for the next one? Jamal took a deep breath. In his rise from South Chicago to the pinnacle of the tech world, he'd faced discrimination in many forms. Usually, he chose his battles carefully, letting some slights go in service of the bigger picture. But something about this moment, the blatant disrespect, the public humiliation, the absolute certainty in Scott Peterson's eyes that there would be no consequences, ignited a resolve in him. Neither, Jamal said simply. He held out his hand. I'll take my ID and boarding pass back now. Heather hesitated, looking to Scott for approval. He nodded, and she returned Jamal's documents. Your loss, Scott said with a shrug. You should be grateful we offered you any seat at all, given the flag on your reservation. It was the word, grateful, that did it. The expectation that he should accept less than what he had earned, paid for, and deserved, and be thankful for it. Thank you for your time, Jamal said with dignity, stepping away from the counter. The crowd parted slightly as he moved to a quieter area near the large windows overlooking the tarmac. He could hear Scott directing the gate agents to continue boarding, could feel the eyes of passengers on him, some sympathetic, others judgmental, most simply uncomfortable with the tension in the air. Jamal stood tall, straightened his tie, and pulled out his phone. Standing by the airport windows, Jamal watched a plane take off, disappearing into the crisp blue morning sky. For a moment, he considered simply booking another flight on a different airline. The meeting in San Francisco was important, potentially company-changing. Was this really the hill to die on? His father's voice echoed in his memory, there are two kinds of dignity, son. The kind they try to take from you, and the kind you give away. Never give yours away. Calvin Washington had worked 30 years on the assembly line at a Chicago factory, facing discrimination daily but never bowing his head. He'd taught Jamal that success wasn't just about money or achievement, it was about maintaining your integrity in a world designed to strip it from you. Jamal looked back at the gate where boarding continued. Scott Peterson caught his eye and smirked slightly, clearly believing he'd won their encounter. The supervisor's certainty that there would be no consequences fueled Jamal's resolve. He scrolled through his contacts and found the name he was looking for, Nathan Reynolds. They'd been roommates at Howard University 20 years ago, before Nathan went to law school and eventually into government service. Now, he was chief of staff for the Secretary of Transportation. Jamal hesitated only briefly before pressing the call button. He rarely used his connections this way, preferring to fight his battles through excellence and perseverance. But sometimes, the system needed to be reminded that discrimination had costs. Jamal. Long time no talk, Nathan's voice came through clearly. We still on for dinner next week? If I make it to DC, Jamal replied. Having a situation at LaGuardia that might interest you professionally. What's going on? Nathan's tone shifted from friendly to concerned. Jamal explained the situation concisely, his first-class ticket, the excessive ID verification, the claim of overbooking despite visible empty seats, the supervisor's attitude, and the stark contrast in how the white passenger was treated. National American Airlines, Jamal finished. Gate B-17. Flight NA-721 to San Francisco. Supervisor's name is Scott Peterson. There was a pause on the line before Nathan spoke again, his voice now completely professional. This isn't the first complaint we've had about National American recently. Let me look into it immediately. Where are you now? Still at the gate. They're finishing boarding. Stay there, Nathan said. I'm going to make some calls. And Jamal, I'm sorry this happened to you. Appreciate it, Jamal replied simply before ending the call. He wasn't sure what, if anything, would come of the call. Nathan had significant influence in transportation matters, but would he use it for what might seem like a personal favor? And even if he did, what could he really do about one passenger's experience? Across the gate area, Scott Peterson was watching him with diminishing interest, clearly assuming the call had been a bluff. Jamal met his gaze steadily until the supervisor turned away to assist another passenger. Rather than wait around to be further humiliated, Jamal decided to leave the gate area. He could get something to eat, reassess his travel options, and figure out how to make it to San Francisco in time for his meeting. As he walked away, he had no idea that his single phone call was already setting in motion events that would shake an entire industry. Nathan Reynolds sat in his spacious office at the Department of Transportation headquarters in Washington, D.C., staring at his phone after Jamal's call ended. His jaw clenched as he processed what he'd just heard. What happened to Jamal wasn't just wrong, it was part of a disturbing pattern his department had been tracking for months. National American Airlines had accumulated more discrimination complaints in the past year than any other major carrier, but they'd managed to avoid serious consequences through aggressive legal maneuvering and strategic political donations. Is this the kind of treatment we allow successful Black Americans to face in 2025? Should a CEO have to endure humiliation simply because of his skin color? If you think Jamal should fight back against this injustice, comment number 1 below. If you believe he should just let it go and focus on his business, comment number 2. And if you're curious about what Nathan is about to do, hit that like button and subscribe to find out. Nathan picked up his secure line and dialed a number few people had access to. Secretary Davis's office, a voice answered. This is Reynolds. I need to speak with the secretary immediately. Priority code orange. Within seconds, Transportation Secretary Michael Davis was on the line. What's the situation, Nathan? Sir, we have another incident with National American. Blatant racial discrimination against a first-class passenger at LaGuardia. Gate agent and supervisor involved. Do we have evidence? Davis asked. The passenger is Jamal Washington. There was a pause. The CEO of Washington Technologies? Yes, sir. My former roommate at Howard. One of the most recognized black executives in the country. If they're treating him this way, then God knows how they're treating everyone else, Davis finished. This could be the case we've been waiting for. Secretary Davis had been looking for a clear-cut incident to justify stronger action against National American Airlines. The company's pattern of discrimination had been documented in internal reports, but they needed an irrefutable example to overcome the inevitable political pushback. What are you proposing? Davis asked. Protocol 27, Nathan said without hesitation. Emergency Safety Inspection Authority. Protocol 27 was rarely invoked, a provision allowing the Department of Transportation to order immediate safety inspections of an airline's entire fleet if there was reasonable suspicion of safety violations or systemic operational issues. It was a nuclear option, capable of grounding every plane in an airline's fleet until inspections were complete. Davis whistled softly. That's aggressive, Nathan. The blowback will be substantial. We have 15 separate discrimination complaints from last month alone, Nathan countered. Plus the whistleblower reports about their maintenance issues on the 737 fleet. We have grounds. There was a long pause before Davis spoke again. Make the call. But Nathan, this better be as clear-cut as you say. Your friend's career isn't the only one on the line here. Understood, sir. Thank you. Nathan immediately contacted the department's operations center, which maintained 24/7 communication with all transportation systems nationwide. This is Chief of Staff Reynolds. Secretary Davis has authorized Protocol 27 for National American Airlines, effective immediately. Authorization code Delta Sierra 947. The operations officer on duty sounded stunned. Sir, Protocol 27 will ground their entire fleet. That's over 150 aircraft. I'm aware. Execute the protocol. As Nathan hung up, he thought back to his college days with Jamal. They'd been inseparable at Howard, Jamal the brilliant computer science major, Nathan the ambitious pre-law student. They'd stayed up late discussing how they would change the world once they had the power to do so. Now, 20 years later, they both had that power. Within minutes, the operations center began contacting National American Airlines planes across the country. The message was the same for each: this is the Department of Transportation. By federal authority, your aircraft is ordered to remain grounded for emergency safety inspection. Disembark all passengers and await further instructions. At major airports across America, Chicago O'Hare, Atlanta Hartsfield-Jackson, Dallas, Fort Worth, Denver International, Los Angeles International, National American planes that were preparing for takeoff were suddenly frozen in place. Planes that had just landed were directed to empty gates but told not to board new passengers. The airline's operational command center in Dallas erupted into chaos as the scope of the situation became clear. Every single one of their planes was being grounded simultaneously. Meanwhile, Nathan made another call, this time to the department's enforcement division. I need a team at LaGuardia Airport, Terminal B, Gate 17, immediately. We have a discrimination incident in progress. I want statements from everyone involved and all security footage secured. As he worked, Nathan couldn't help but wonder if he was overstepping. Was he abusing his power to help a friend? But the more he thought about it, the more certain he became. This wasn't about friendship, it was about justice. If someone as prominent and successful as Jamal Washington could be treated this way, what hope did ordinary travelers have? The department had been building a case against National American Airlines for months. Jamal's experience wasn't the cause, it was the catalyst, the final piece of evidence that justified action that was long overdue. Within 30 minutes of Jamal's call, the most dramatic airline grounding since 9/11 was underway, affecting tens of thousands of passengers across the country. And at LaGuardia's Gate B-17, Scott Peterson's radio crackled with the most bewildering message of his 15-year career: all flights grounded by federal order. Repeat, all national American flights nationwide are grounded effective immediately. What would happen next? Was Nathan's dramatic action justified? How would national American Airlines respond to this unprecedented shutdown? Stay tuned as the story continues to unfold. Jamal found a quiet corner in an airport restaurant, nursing a cup of coffee as he contemplated his next steps. His phone buzzed with an incoming text from Kimberly: "United has a flight to SF in 2 hours. Should I book it?" Before he could reply, a breaking news alert flashed across the television mounted on the restaurant wall: "Breaking, National American Airlines grounds all flights for emergency inspections." Jamal froze, coffee cup halfway to his lips. The news ticker scrolled additional details: 152 flights affected nationwide. Thousands of passengers stranded. Stock plummeting in pre-market trading. His phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from Nathan: "Check the news. They messed with the wrong CEO today." A cold realization washed over Jamal. This wasn't coincidence. This was cause and effect. His call to Nathan had triggered something massive, something beyond what he had anticipated or intended. Across the airport, the public address system crackled to life: "Attention passengers, all national American Airlines flights have been temporarily suspended due to a federal safety directive. Passengers are advised to contact the airline for rebooking options. We apologize for any inconvenience." Jamal's phone began ringing incessantly: Kimberly, board members, executive team colleagues. News traveled fast in business circles, and people were already connecting the dots between his presence at LaGuardia and the airline's sudden operational collapse. He stepped out of the restaurant and made his way back toward Gate B-17, drawn by a morbid curiosity to see the aftermath of what his call had unleashed. The scene at the gate had transformed entirely. Where there had been the controlled chaos of boarding, there was now genuine pandemonium. Dozens of stranded passengers crowded the counter, demanding explanations from the overwhelmed gate agents. Heather Miller looked pale and frantic as she tried to calm an irate businessman. "Sir, I understand your frustration, but this is a federal directive. It's completely out of our control." Brian Thompson was on the phone, his expression growing increasingly desperate as he listened to whoever was on the other end. "But we've already begun boarding." "Yes, I understand it's nationwide." "No, we haven't been told why." And in the center of it all stood Scott Peterson, the supervisor who had smugly denied Jamal his rightful seat just 30 minutes earlier. The man's face had lost all color as he spoke urgently into a radio, sweat beading on his forehead. "What do you mean, federal inspection? Which agency? On what grounds?" His voice cracked with stress. "The whole airline? That's impossible." As Jamal watched from a distance, Scott suddenly looked up and met his gaze. For a moment, confusion clouded the supervisor's features, then dawning comprehension, followed by disbelief and, finally, naked fear. Jamal maintained eye contact for a long moment, his expression neutral. He gave the slightest nod, an acknowledgement, not a celebration, before turning away. His phone buzzed with another text from Nathan: "DOT enforcement team arriving at your gate in approximately 10 minutes. They'll want a statement." Meanwhile, across the country, the situation was repeating itself at dozens of airports. In Dallas, National American's operational headquarters had transformed into a crisis center. The airline's vice president of operations, Sandra Martinez, stared in disbelief at the monitoring screens showing red alert indicators for every single aircraft in their fleet. "This can't be happening," she whispered to her deputy. "Get Harold on the phone. Now." Harold Wilson, CEO of National American Airlines, was on the 7th hole of an exclusive golf course outside Phoenix when his caddy ran toward him, holding out a phone. "Sir. Emergency call from headquarters." Wilson's relaxed demeanor vanished as he listened to the frantic voice of his VP of operations. "Sandra, slow down. What do you mean, all our planes are grounded?" As the magnitude of the crisis became clear, Wilson barked into the phone. "Get the executive team on an emergency call in 15 minutes. Contact our DOT liaison. Find out what the hell is going on." Back at LaGuardia, Jamal received another text, this one from his company's chief financial officer. National American stock down 18% in first 20 minutes of trading. $2.1 billion in market cap gone already. What's happening? Social media was exploding with the story. Videos of stranded passengers, chaos at gates, and speculation about the cause were trending nationwide. The hashtag National American Grounded was already #1 on Twitter. A financial news channel playing in the airport lounge had shifted to full crisis coverage. In an unprecedented move, the Department of Transportation has ordered the grounding of all National American Airlines flights, citing unspecified safety concerns. The airline stock is in freefall, with trading nearly halted due to volatility circuit breakers. This could be the most costly single-day disaster for an airline since the pandemic. Jamal's phone rang again. This time it was Tamara Brooks, his company's public relations advisor. "Jamal, there are rumors connecting you to what's happening with National American. CNN is trying to reach you for comment. What do you want me to tell them?" Jamal took a deep breath. "Tell them I have no comment at this time." "Are the rumors true?" Tamara pressed. "Did you cause this?" Jamal watched as two official-looking individuals in Department of Transportation windbreakers approached Gate B-17. Scott Peterson's face drained of what little color it had left. "I didn't cause anything, Tamara," Jamal said quietly. "I just refuse to accept being treated as less than what I am." As he ended the call, Jamal reflected on the incredible chain of events his single phone call had triggered. He hadn't asked Nathan to ground planes or crash stock prices. He'd simply shared his experience with someone who had the power to address it. But that was the thing about power, it existed in networks, in connections, in the ability to make things happen. For too long, people like Scott Peterson had operated with impunity, confident that their actions would have no consequences. Today, that calculation had changed dramatically. Jamal watched as the DOT officials approached Scott, showed their credentials, and began asking questions. The supervisor's body language told the story, shoulders slumped, hands gesturing defensively, head shaking in denial. One of the officials pointed in Jamal's direction. Scott turned, his face a mask of dawning horror as he realized just who he had discriminated against, not just any black passenger, but a powerful CEO with powerful friends. Jamal's phone buzzed with an incoming call. The screen displayed an unfamiliar number with a Dallas area code, National American's headquarters. He let it ring. Harold Wilson's private jet touched down at Dallas Love Field just after noon. The CEO of National American Airlines had been forced to charter a competitor's aircraft to reach his company's headquarters, a humiliation that deepened his fury over the situation. "Give me the latest," he barked at the executive team assembled in the conference room overlooking the operations center. Sandra Martinez, the VP of operations, cleared her throat nervously. All 152 aircraft remain grounded. The DOT is citing safety protocol verification, but won't give specifics. We have over 38,000 passengers stranded nationwide. Customer service is overwhelmed. Social media is brutal. What about our stock? Wilson demanded. The CFO winced visibly. Down 27% before trading was halted. We've lost approximately $2.1 billion in market value today alone. Wilson slammed his fist on the table. This is insanity. They can't just ground an entire airline without specific cause. Where are our lawyers? General Counsel Thomas Wright adjusted his glasses uncomfortably. We've filed for an emergency injunction, but the courts move slowly. And Harold, There's something else you should know. The room fell silent as Wright pulled up an email on the conference room screen. This came in from our station manager at LaGuardia 30 minutes ago. Apparently, there was an incident this morning involving a first-class passenger who was denied boarding. The DOT has investigators interviewing our gate staff right now. Wilson scanned the email, his expression darkening. Are they suggesting this whole thing is because of one passenger complaint? That's absurd. The passenger in question, Wright continued cautiously, was Jamal Washington. The name hung in the air for a moment before Wilson's face drained of color. The Jamal Washington, CEO of Washington Technologies. The same. Jesus Christ, Wilson muttered. What exactly happened? The details emerged slowly as the LaGuardia station manager was conferenced in. Gate supervisor Scott Peterson had denied Washington his first-class seat despite a valid boarding pass, claiming an overbooking situation that didn't exist. Security footage reviewed by the station manager showed clear differential treatment between Washington and white passengers. Peterson claimed there was a flag on the reservation, the station manager explained. But our system shows no such flag. It appears he invented it. Wilson's face had turned from pale to crimson. Are you telling me we're losing millions of dollars a minute because one of our supervisors is a racist idiot? It's worse than that, the general counsel interjected. Washington Technologies has a corporate account with us worth approximately $8 million annually. And Jamal Washington sits on the President's Technology Advisory Board. He has connections. Get Peterson fired. Immediately, Wilson ordered. Already done, the station manager confirmed. But sir, the DOT investigators are saying this isn't just about today's incident. They're bringing up dozens of discrimination complaints from the past year. They're calling it a pattern of systemic issues. The PR director spoke up for the first time. The narrative is already forming online. #FlyingWhileBlack is trending. We're being compared to lunch counter segregation from the 1960s. Wilson stood up and paced the length of the conference room, struggling to contain his rage. Find Washington. Offer him whatever he wants, lifetime first class, $10 million in compensation, name a plane after him. Just get him to call off his government dogs. The chief of staff raised her hand tentatively. Sir, I don't think it works that way. The DOT investigation seems to have taken on a life of its own. And Washington hasn't made any public statements or demands. Then what does he want? Wilson exploded. The room fell silent again. No one had an answer. In the operations center below, dozens of staff members worked frantically to reroute stranded passengers, many of whom were being accommodated on competitor airlines at National American's expense, another massive financial hit. Wilson's phone rang. It was the chairman of the board. Harold, the board is convening an emergency session in 1 hour, the chairman said without preamble. We expect you to attend and explain how you plan to resolve this catastrophe. Before Wilson could respond, his PR director approached with a tablet displaying a breaking news headline: DOT announces formal investigation into discrimination allegations at National American Airlines. The accompanying photo showed Secretary of Transportation Michael Davis at a podium, looking stern as he addressed reporters. The caption noted that this was the first time in decades that an entire airline had been grounded for non-mechanical reasons. Wilson's phone buzzed with another incoming call, this one from the company's largest institutional investor. The corporate damage control machine was in full swing, but it was already clear that this crisis was beyond anything their standard playbooks could address. The simultaneous grounding of every plane, the stock price collapse, the public relations nightmare, and now a federal investigation, it was an existential threat to the airline's survival. And it had all started with one passenger being denied the seat he had paid for. In a quiet corner of the executive floor, the company's chief diversity officer, a position created 3 years earlier but given little actual authority, opened her files on the dozens of internal complaints she had documented and escalated without result. Perhaps now, finally, someone would listen. Meanwhile, at LaGuardia, the DOT investigators had finished interviewing Scott Peterson and were reviewing security camera footage. One of them made a phone call. "Sir, you're going to want to see this footage yourself," the investigator told Secretary Davis. "It's as blatant as anything I've seen in 20 years on the job." As executives scrambled and investigators gathered evidence, Jamal Washington sat in a quiet corner of the American Airlines Admirals Club, having been offered complimentary access by a competing airline eager to distance itself from National American's troubles. His phone continued to buzz with messages and calls, but he responded only to his team, assuring them he was fine and working on alternative travel arrangements. A text came in from Nathan, "You okay?" Jamal typed back, "I'm fine. Is this really all because of my call?" Nathan's response came quickly, "Your call was the spark, but the kindling was already there. This was long overdue." Jamal stared at the message for a long moment before putting his phone away. He had never intended to bring an entire airline to its knees or wipe billions from its market value. He had simply wanted to be treated with the dignity he deserved. But sometimes, that was revolutionary enough. By mid-afternoon, the National American Airlines crisis had exploded from a business story to a national conversation about race, power, and accountability in America. Major news networks interrupted regular programming with breaking news banners: "Tech billionaire discrimination grounds national airline, Black CEO denied seat, airline loses billions, DOT freezes National American operations after racism allegations." Leaked security footage from LaGuardia began circulating online, showing the stark contrast between how Jamal Washington and white passengers were treated at the boarding gate. The clip spread like wildfire across social media platforms, garnering millions of views within hours. "This is what we mean by systemic racism," a prominent civil rights activist explained on CNN. When even a billionaire CEO in a suit can be treated this way because of his skin color, imagine what happens to ordinary black travelers every day. Jamal's phone had become unusable due to the constant barrage of incoming calls: journalists, TV producers, radio hosts, podcast creators, all desperate for an exclusive statement or interview. Tamara Brooks, his PR advisor, had set up a command center in Washington Technology's New York office to manage the media tsunami. "Jamal, we need to get ahead of this narrative," she urged during a brief call that actually connected. "Every network wants you. 60 Minutes, Good Morning America, CNN, Fox, they're all offering prime slots. This is your moment to shape the conversation." "I didn't do this for attention," Jamal replied firmly. "I did it because it was wrong." "I understand that," Tamara countered, "but this story is happening with or without your input. Don't you want to ensure your perspective is accurately represented?" Before Jamal could respond, his phone beeped with another incoming call, this one from National American Airlines CEO Harold Wilson himself. Jamal declined it without hesitation. Seconds later, a text from an unknown number: "Mr. Washington, this is Harold Wilson. Please give me 5 minutes of your time. This situation has escalated beyond all reason." Jamal didn't respond to that either. Online, the incident had tapped into a deep well of similar experiences. The hashtag #FlyingWhileBlack had generated over 500,000 posts in just a few hours, with black travelers sharing their own stories of discrimination, profiling, and humiliation at airports and on planes. "Watched a flight attendant move a white woman who didn't want to sit next to me in first class. I'm a pediatric surgeon." #FlyingWhileBlack, gate agent demanded to see my boarding pass 3 times for first class. White passengers walked right through. #FlyingWhileBlack, asked for a complaint form after being searched randomly for the 5th straight flight. Was told they were out of forms. #FlyingWhileBlack, the conversation expanded beyond air travel to touch on the broader experience of being black in corporate America. Business publications ran special features on the Black CEO experience, highlighting the persistent barriers and biases faced by black executives even at the highest levels. Washington Technologies employees rallied behind their CEO. The company's internal messaging system overflowed with supportive messages, and a group of employees organized an impromptu demonstration outside National American's ticket counter at San Francisco International Airport, holding signs reading, "Stand with Jamal," and "Dignity is non-negotiable." Competing airlines, sensing both a moral opportunity and a business advantage, began issuing statements condemning discrimination and announcing reviews of their own diversity practices. 3 carriers publicly offered Jamal lifetime first-class status on their airlines. Delta's CEO released a statement, "What happened to Mr. Washington reflects a failure that extends beyond one airline. We must all do better." By late afternoon, the story had reached the White House. During the daily press briefing, a reporter asked if the president had been briefed on the situation. "The president is aware of the incident involving Mr. Washington and the subsequent actions by the Department of Transportation," the press secretary confirmed. "While we don't comment on ongoing investigations, the president has always been clear that discrimination has no place in America, including in our transportation systems." Financial analysts began calculating the long-term damage to National American. Beyond the immediate costs of the grounding and rerouting thousands of passengers, the reputational damage threatened future bookings, corporate accounts, and investor confidence. This could be a $5 billion hit when all is said and done, a CNBC analyst predicted. The question now is whether National American can survive this crisis intact. As evening approached, Jamal finally managed to book a private jet to San Francisco, the irony of the situation not lost on him. He had begun the day as a first-class passenger and would end it on a private aircraft, all because an airline couldn't see past his skin color. Before boarding, he took one call, from his father in Chicago. "I saw the news," Calvin Washington said simply. "You okay, son?" "I'm fine, Dad," Jamal assured him. "This got bigger than I expected." "Sometimes standing your ground does that," his father replied. "Your mother and I are proud of you. Not for being a big CEO, we've always been proud of that. But for remembering what I taught you about dignity." Jamal felt a lump in his throat. "Thanks, Dad." As he ended the call, Tamara texted him again, "National American stock to remain halted tomorrow. Board of Directors in emergency session. Rumor of potential CEO resignation. We need to decide on your public statement soon." Jamal stared at the message, contemplating the incredible chain of events his stand had triggered. He had never sought to bring down an airline or force an executive resignation. He had simply refused to accept being treated as less than. But perhaps that was the point. Perhaps this moment was about more than one incident or one airline. Perhaps it was about all the times people had swallowed their dignity in the name of getting along, all the times discrimination had been met with resignation instead of resistance. As he boarded the private jet, Jamal finally composed a brief public statement and sent it to Tamara. "What happened today was not about me. It was about a system that needs change. I look forward to discussing constructive solutions with National American Airlines when they're ready to have that conversation." With that, he turned off his phone and prepared for takeoff, unaware that his statement would set the stage for one of the most dramatic corporate reckonings in recent American history. The Department of Transportation's headquarters in Washington, D.C. buzzed with unusual energy for a Saturday morning. Secretary Michael Davis had called in key staff for an emergency press conference that would reshape the air travel industry. At precisely 10:00 a.m., Davis approached the podium, flanked by enforcement officials and civil rights attorneys. Camera shutters clicked rapidly as he adjusted the microphone. "Good morning. Today, the Department of Transportation is announcing a formal investigation into discriminatory practices at National American Airlines following numerous documented incidents, including yesterday's inexcusable treatment of Washington Technologies CEO Jamal Washington." Davis continued with measured severity. "Let me be clear, what our preliminary investigation has uncovered goes far beyond a single incident. We have identified a pattern of discriminatory treatment affecting thousands of passengers. The secretary held up a thick binder. This report contains over 300 documented complaints from the past year alone. We have secured internal communications suggesting a corporate culture that tacitly permitted, and in some cases encouraged, differential treatment based on race, religion, and national origin. The press corps erupted with questions, but Davis raised his hand for silence. This investigation will be thorough and transparent. National American's fleet will remain grounded until we have verified their compliance with federal non-discrimination requirements. We are also reviewing their operating license under statutes that require airlines to serve all passengers equally. As the press conference continued in Washington, Jamal Washington was concluding his meeting in San Francisco, the one he had nearly missed due to the previous day's events. Despite the personal turmoil, he had delivered a flawless presentation, and a $500 million government contract was now all but secured. As he packed up his presentation materials, his phone rang with a number he now recognized, Harold Wilson, CEO of National American Airlines. This time, Jamal answered. "Mr. Washington," Wilson began, his voice strained with forced politeness. "Thank you for taking my call. I wanted to personally express my deepest apologies for your experience with our airline yesterday. What happened was inexcusable and does not reflect our company values." Jamal remained silent, letting the uncomfortable pause extend. Wilson continued, his words coming faster. "We would like to offer you a settlement package including lifetime unlimited first-class travel, $10 million in compensation, and a public apology. All we ask is that you issue a statement of reconciliation to help us move past this unfortunate incident." "Mr. Wilson," Jamal finally responded, his voice calm but firm, "I'm not interested in free flights or money." "Then what do you want?" Wilson asked, desperation creeping into his voice. "Structural change," Jamal replied simply. "And accountability. We're already implementing new diversity training programs." "Training isn't enough," Jamal interrupted. "You need independent oversight of your practices, transparent reporting of discrimination complaints, and consequences for employees at all levels who engage in or tolerate discriminatory behavior." Wilson hesitated. That would be unprecedented in our industry." "So was grounding your entire fleet," Jamal countered. "Times change, Mr. Wilson. Industries evolve. The question is whether National American will lead that evolution or be left behind by it." The call ended without a resolution, but Jamal knew he had made his position clear. This wasn't about personal compensation, it was about systemic change. Meanwhile, the National American Airlines Board of Directors meeting had extended into its second day. The conversation had shifted from crisis management to existential questions about the company's leadership and culture. "The stock will collapse when trading resumes Monday if we don't take decisive action," warned the lead independent director. "We've lost the confidence of the market, our customers, and now the federal government." "Harold has been with the company for 20 years, another board member argued. "We can't just throw him overboard at the first sign of trouble." "First sign," countered a newer board member, one of only 2 black directors on the 12-person board. "I've been raising concerns about our diversity practices since I joined this board 2 years ago. The minutes will show that I specifically warned about our customer complaint patterns last quarter, and I was assured it was being addressed." The chairman sighed heavily. "We've received Wilson's resignation letter. The question now is whether to accept it, and if so, how to announce it in a way that begins to rebuild trust." As the board deliberated, a bombshell dropped on social media. An anonymous account had leaked internal emails from National American's customer service department showing explicit instructions to flag "Emmy-appearing" passengers, widely understood to mean Middle Eastern, for additional security screening and to use discretion in upgrading non-traditional first-class demographic passengers from the waitlist. The leaked emails exploded across news platforms, confirming what many had suspected: the airline's discriminatory practices were not isolated incidents but part of a systemic approach. In Washington, D.C., the Congressional Black Caucus announced emergency hearings on discrimination in the airline industry. The chair of the House Transportation Committee issued subpoenas for National American's internal records and called for testimony from top executives. Civil rights organizations filed class action lawsuits on behalf of affected passengers, citing violations of federal civil rights laws. Legal experts predicted potential damages in the hundreds of millions. Jamal, meanwhile, had been contacted by the DOT about providing testimony for their investigation. After consulting with his company's legal team, he agreed. This isn't just about one incident, he explained to Kimberly Jones as they flew back to New York on a competitor airline. This is about changing an industry that has normalized discrimination for decades. Kimberly nodded thoughtfully. Do you think anything will really change? It already has, Jamal replied. Look around. He gestured to their first-class cabin, where the flight attendant was providing impeccable service to a diverse group of passengers. The airline had issued a company-wide notice that morning reinforcing its non-discrimination policies and announcing a review of its own practices. Fear of consequences is a powerful motivator, Jamal continued. For too long, companies have calculated that the cost of discrimination was lower than the cost of changing their practices. That calculation is being rewritten in real time. As their plane approached New York, Jamal received an email from Nathan Reynolds with the subject line, "You started something big." The message contained a link to a confidential DOT briefing showing that the investigation had expanded beyond National American to examine industry-wide practices. 3 additional airlines had already volunteered to review their policies and implement reforms rather than face similar scrutiny. Sometimes change needs a catalyst, Nathan had written. Your stand was that catalyst. Jamal stared out the window at the New York skyline coming into view. He thought about his father on the assembly line in Chicago, maintaining his dignity through daily indignities. He thought about all the passengers who had shared their #FlyingWhileBlack stories, finding solidarity in shared experiences that had too often been dismissed or minimized. And he thought about Scott Peterson, the gate supervisor whose casual racism had triggered this cascade of consequences. Peterson had been fired immediately, of course, but the real failure wasn't one man's bigotry, it was a system that had enabled and protected that bigotry until the cost became too high to bear. As the plane touched down, Jamal's phone lit up with a news alert, breaking. National American Airlines Board accepts CEO resignation, announces comprehensive anti-discrimination initiative. The reckoning had begun. 6 months later, Jamal Washington stood in the first-class check-in line at LaGuardia Airport, once again preparing to board a National American Airlines flight to San Francisco. The sense of déjà vu was palpable, but everything else had changed. Good morning, Mr. Washington, greeted the gate agent, a young black man whose name tag read Anthony Johnson. We're honored to have you flying with us today. Your boarding pass is confirmed for seat 2A in first class. Anthony's smile was genuine, his manner professional without being obsequious. There was respect in his eyes, but not the fear or forced deference that had become common in the immediate aftermath of what the media had dubbed the Washington incident. Thank you, Anthony, Jamal replied, accepting his boarding pass with a nod. As he moved toward security, Jamal reflected on the whirlwind of the past 6 months. The congressional hearings had been grueling but necessary, with his testimony providing a powerful centerpiece to discussions about systemic discrimination in air travel. The Department of Transportation's final report had been damning, documenting patterns of discriminatory treatment across multiple airlines but finding National American's practices particularly egregious. The company had ultimately paid $175 million in fines and settlements, leading to significant changes in leadership and practices. Harold Wilson had resigned as CEO, replaced by Denise Marshall, a respected industry veteran who had made diversity and inclusion central to her leadership approach. More significantly, the airline's board had been restructured to include 5 directors of color, giving it the most diverse governance in the industry. But the most meaningful changes were operational. National American had implemented the independent oversight committee Jamal had demanded, with quarterly public reporting of discrimination complaints and resolution actions. Every employee, from baggage handlers to the executive suite, underwent comprehensive anti-bias training developed in partnership with civil rights organizations. The gate agents and supervisors now wore body cameras during boarding procedures, a controversial measure initially but one that had dramatically reduced complaints while protecting employees from false accusations. As Jamal cleared security, without the extra scrutiny that had once been routine, his phone buzzed with a text from Nathan Reynolds. "How does it feel to return to the scene of the crime?" Jamal smiled and texted back. "Less like returning to a crime scene, more like visiting a reformed offender." In truth, Jamal had been hesitant about flying National American again. Washington Technologies had suspended its corporate account with the airline immediately after the incident. But when National American had approached him about reinstating the relationship after implementing all the reforms he'd requested, Jamal had seen an opportunity to demonstrate good faith. The company's new anti-discrimination training program had been particularly impressive. Designed with input from Jamal and other business leaders of color, it focused not just on avoiding explicit bias but on recognizing and addressing the subtle ways discrimination manifested in customer service. At the gate, Jamal noticed Scott Peterson's replacement, a middle-aged woman who managed the boarding process with efficient courtesy, treating each passenger with the same level of respect regardless of appearance or ticket class. 6 months ago, first-class boarding had been where his dignity was challenged. Today, he stepped onto the plane without incident, finding his seat by the window just as he had originally booked that fateful day. As other passengers boarded, several recognized him, some offering subtle nods of acknowledgement, others stopping briefly to express support. One elderly black woman squeezed his shoulder as she passed. "Thank you," she whispered. "My husband and I have been flying for 50 years. This is the first time we haven't felt like we need to prove we belong in first class." Her words touched him deeply, reminding him that his stand had repercussions beyond corporate policies and public relations. Real people experienced real changes in how they were treated. The flight attendant approached with pre-takeoff beverages. "Mr. Washington, it's an honor to serve you today. Can I offer you champagne or orange juice?" "Orange juice would be perfect, thank you," he replied. As the plane prepared for departure, Jamal opened his laptop to review materials for his upcoming meeting. Washington Technologies had indeed secured that $500 million government contract he'd been pursuing the day of the incident. The publicity surrounding his stand against discrimination had unexpectedly boosted the company's profile, with many clients expressing admiration for his principles. The hashtag #FlyingWhileBlack conversation had evolved into a broader movement addressing discrimination in various service industries. Jamal had found himself an unwitting symbol of resistance, his experience catalyzing discussions about how success and wealth did not shield Black Americans from racism. His tech team had even developed a new app, TravelRight, that allowed passengers to report and track discrimination incidents across all transportation systems. The data collected was already helping identify problematic patterns and pressure companies to improve. Jamal's phone buzzed with an incoming email from Kimberly. The subject line read, "You should see this." The message contained a link to a news article about Scott Peterson, the former gate supervisor whose actions had triggered the entire chain of events. After being fired by National American, Peterson had struggled to find employment in the airline industry. The article described how he had eventually found work with a community outreach program focused on racial reconciliation. "I never understood the impact of my biases until they cost me everything," Peterson was quoted saying. "Now I share my story as a warning to others." Jamal closed the email without a clear emotion. He had never sought Peterson's destruction, only accountability and change. If the man had genuinely learned and grown from the experience, perhaps some good had come from that aspect of the story too. As the plane taxied for takeoff, Jamal gazed out the window at the LaGuardia tarmac. 6 months ago, he had watched from this airport as his single phone call set in motion events that would transform an industry, cost billions in market value, end careers, launch initiatives, and reignite national conversations about race and dignity. He had never intended to become an activist or symbol. He had simply refused to accept being treated as less than what he was, a first-class passenger, a successful CEO, a human being deserving of dignity. Sometimes, that simple refusal was enough to change the world. The plane accelerated down the runway and lifted into the clear blue sky. As New York receded below, Jamal thought about the young entrepreneur he had met last week, a brilliant black woman developing new cybersecurity protocols who had told him his stand had inspired her to pursue her dreams without compromise. "Your story taught me that I don't have to choose between success and dignity," she had said. "I can demand both." That, perhaps, was the most important outcome of all, the permission it gave others to stand firm in their own worth, to refuse the false choice between achievement and respect. As the plane reached cruising altitude, the captain's voice came over the intercom, "Ladies and gentlemen, we've reached our cruising altitude of 35,000 feet. The weather in San Francisco is sunny and clear. On behalf of all of us at National American Airlines, I want to thank you for flying with us today." Jamal settled back in his seat, the one he had paid for, the one he deserved, and allowed himself a small smile of satisfaction. One call had indeed frozen 152 flights and cost $2.1 billion in revenue. But its true value was measured in the dignity it had affirmed and the changes it had inspired, changes that would benefit countless passengers long after the financial losses were forgotten. Jamal's story teaches us that dignity should never be compromised, regardless of our position in life. When faced with discrimination, his refusal to accept less than he deserved triggered industry-wide change. This powerful reminder shows how systemic racism often persists because people calculate that the cost of discrimination is lower than the cost of changing practices. The ripple effects of Jamal's stand demonstrate how individual actions can become catalysts for structural transformation. By focusing on systemic change rather than personal compensation, he ensured that his experience would benefit countless others facing similar situations. Perhaps most importantly, this story reveals that power exists in unexpected places, in connections, in the courage to speak up, and in the refusal to accept injustice as inevitable. Discrimination thrives in silence and operates with impunity when those affected choose accommodation over confrontation. True change requires both personal courage and institutional accountability. Neither is sufficient alone. Jamal's dignified resistance, combined with proper institutional oversight, created a template for addressing discrimination that extended far beyond one airline or one incident. What do you think about Jamal's decision to fly with National American Airlines again? Would you have given them a second chance after their reforms, or boycotted them permanently? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If you've ever had to stand up against discrimination, share your experience. Your voice matters just as much as Jamal's did. Hit that like button, subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories of courage against injustice, and share this video with someone who needs to be reminded of their own worth. Thank you for watching, and remember, your dignity is non-negotiable, and sometimes one moment of refusing to accept less than you deserve can transform an entire system.